has said innumerable times the accelerated rollout was under European Medicines Agency legislation. With the Labour Party having now lashed itself to the mast of the floundering Brexit ship, does the Secretary of State at least recognise the only route back to the EU for Scotland is as an independent country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the deficit in Scotland is considerably higher than the 3%, which is the Maastricht criteria. That is not the route back. The currency is a problem as well, because, as we know, the Bank of England is the bank of last resort, and there would have to be a new currency in Scotland, followed by membership of the EU. There's no desire in Scotland to have membership of the EU. I believe that Scots, when they stop and look at the detail, whether it's on their pensions, whether it's on trade, whether it's on currency, they stop, they think about it, and they know that their home is the United Kingdom.
Ms. Ross. Number 2, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question. Scottish communities have benefited from the UK Government's £150 million Community Ownership Fund, which is a key pillar in our levelling up agenda. To date, more than £2 million has been invested in 10 projects across Scotland through this fund, including over £200,000 to restore the not-for-profit community-run Old Forge pub on the Knoydart Peninsula, and £250,000 invested in Perthing Kinross's Rannoch hub to provide the historic building with new business and leisure facilities for the local community.
As it's the 11th of January, can I take the opportunity today to wish everyone in Burghead a very happy Clavey? This is a historic tradition that dates back to the 1750s, and tonight, like his predecessors, Clavey King Dan Ralph will carry along with his crew a barrel of burning tar and oil through the streets up to Dury Hill to welcome in the new year. It really is an incredible sight, and I wish everyone well tonight. The Minister mentioned levelling up. He will know that Murray Council have submitted an ambitious bid that will see jobs and investment in Elgin and across Murray. Can he give us an update on that bid from Murray Council?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for highlighting the activities taking place in Burghead tonight, and I wish Dan Ralph and his team well in the Clavey this evening. Mr. Speaker, I welcome Murray Council's engagement with the Levelling Up programme. As my honourable friend will know, the Levelling Up Fund invests in infrastructure that improves everyday lives across the United Kingdom. To date, 8 Scottish projects have been successful, funded to a value of over £171 million. The United Kingdom Government will shortly make an announcement on successful bids from round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund, and I look forward to seeing more successful Scottish bids as part of this announcement.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Deputy Assistant Junior Viceroy if he could just come to the dispatch box and be honest that actually Scotland is being shortchanged as a result of being dragged out of the European Union when we used to benefit from so much more in the way of regional development money rather than the poxy pork barrel politics of levelling up money?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed that the honourable member does not welcome this additional investment that's been made by this government into Scottish communities across Scotland. We are making decisions based on real devolution, supporting local councils across Scotland, invest in local communities, whilst the Scottish Government takes increasingly more powers away from those local councils.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 3 and 6 together. Scotland is, of course, already benefiting from the United Kingdom's independent trade policy. To date, we have signed 71 trade deals with non-EU countries and the European Union, worth £808 billion in 2021. And as you will know, Mr. Speaker, we have further high-value deals in sight with the Trans-Pacific region, India and the Gulf states. My priority is to ensure that Scotland's best interests continue to be represented in our ambitious programme of free trade agreement negotiation.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government has an extensive overseas network via its embassies, the British Council and so on. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to ensure that the UK Government works collaboratively with the Scottish businesses, especially SMEs, the Scottish Government to maximise opportunities and utilise resources to best promote the Scottish brand and businesses overseas?
Minister.
Our response to the recent Scottish Affairs Committee inquiry into promoting Scotland internationally highlights the wide range of activities which the Scotland Office, FCDO and DIT are undertaking around the world to promote Scottish interests across diverse areas, including trade and investment. UK export finance has provided £2.1 billion to Scottish companies since 2016-17, supporting a range of businesses including food processors, hydro research, manufacturing and renewable energy. Our approach to attracting foreign investment in Scotland is driven by the Office of Investment, launched in 2020. The successes of this programme, Mr Speaker, are clear, with 4,408 new jobs created by overseas investment.
Mr Speaker, does the Secretary of State agree that the United Kingdom securing the double taxation agreement with Brazil, with its 212 million population, is a very significant event for many Scottish exporting businesses, and that the UK's work to agree geographical identification for Scottish whisky in Brazil will help secure even more jobs in Scotland?
Minister. Yes, Mr Speaker, I do agree, and I commend my honourable friend for his efforts as the government's trade envoy to Brazil. As he will know, Scotland exports the most goods from the United Kingdom to Brazil, so stands to benefit greatly from the agreement on double taxation when implemented. Given the importance of the Brazil export market, I also share his ambition of securing GI protection for Scotch whisky in Brazil as soon as possible, for the obvious benefits this will bring to both producers and consumers of our national drink.
Mr Speaker, I assume that you will be surprised and delighted to learn that last summer a Bollywood biopic was filmed in Caithness in my constituency. That was a lot of dosh being spent in the north of Scotland. Screen tourism brings in almost £65 million for Scottish businesses. More than half of the people in the UK think that Scotland is one of the finest film and TV locations. So can I ask the Minister what he's going to do to promote Scotland as one of the best film locations in the world?
Mr Speaker, I very much agree with the honourable member's points about the Scottish film industry. I know he has a distinguished career on the stage during his time in the pantomime season. There is a real opportunity here for Scotland. We can see the benefits from Scottish tourism, from TV shows like the Outlander and the BBC's recent Traitors show. I'm meeting Visit Scotland next week, and I look forward to discussing these opportunities further with them. Thank you.
I don't know where all this tush that we've heard comes from this morning, but the reality of trade arrangements in Scotland and the UK means that £15 billion is less spent than it would have been in the last quarter of 2022 than it would have been because of Brexit. What does he have to say to businesses in Scotland suffering under this calamitous Brexit that they didn't vote for? And when is he going to do something or anything that will help Scotland to escape this Brexit disaster?
Mr Speaker, I know the honourable member and the SNP historically have been anti-trade, but this government is unquestionably committed to expanding the trade opportunities for Scotland. Trade continues to grow, trade continues to be an opportunity for the Scottish economy, and trade, Mr Speaker, creates jobs for Scotland.
Stevens.
Mr Speaker. Here.
Mr Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 4 and 7 together. Like many countries around the world, the UK faces the dual challenge of a recession and high inflation. That's why the Prime Minister has made tackling inflation a key priority. As outlined in the Chancellor's autumn statement, this government is committed to supporting the most vulnerable households across the United Kingdom with £12 billion worth of direct support in 2023-24. Alongside this, the energy price guarantee is saving a typical household in Scotland £900 this winter.
Mr Stevens.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for his response. Now, he'll know, in contrast to the UK energy resources which were privatised under previous Conservative administrations, France's publicly owned company can cap energy prices at 4%, and Germany's cut VAT in energy to 7%. So can I ask the Minister what representations made to government colleagues to follow European examples and prevent costs going up at source, saving money for people, businesses and taxpayers?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to supporting the most vulnerable in Scotland through this inflationary crisis, through the extra support that's going to the Scottish Government, the record-breaking block grant, together £1.5 billion worth of additional funding through the Barnett consequentials. That is on top of the energy support packages that has been put in place by this government. This compassionate Conservative government will continue to work to support the most vulnerable in Scotland and across the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Data from the UK Government shows that standing charges for Scottish households are above the UK average. Yet Scotland is an energy-rich country in her own right, producing over 60% of the UK's gas and a third of its green electricity. This broken Westminster system results in my constituency of Airdrie shops and those across Scotland struggling with the cost of living. So can the department explain why people in energy-rich Scotland are paying more despite being energy producers?
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Lady will know, Ofgem are currently reviewing the charges structure. The UK Government continues to engage with Ofgem as part of that process. Ofgem are independent of the UK Government, and we look forward to the recommendations that they bring forward.
General Secretary of State Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, analysis of average wages in Scotland showed that they are almost £800 lower in real terms than when this government came to power 13 years ago. And my own constituency, it's £6,000 lower. That's the result of 13 years of Tory and SNP incompetence in not growing the economy. So does the Minister agree with me that after 13 miserable years of Tory wage stagnation, and with inflation now soaring into double digits, that this cost of living crisis for families in Scotland is made in Downing Street?
Mr. Speaker, no, I do not agree with the honourable member. This government is committed to ensuring that wages go further and people can keep more of what they earn. From April 2023, we're increasing the national living wage by 9.7%, the biggest ever cash rise, meaning an extra £1,600 a year for a full-time worker over 23. Since 2010, this government has also increased tax-free allowances for both income tax and national insurance for more than inflation, roughly doubling them in cash terms, taking millions more people out of paying tax altogether.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure workers in Scotland will be delighted to hear that when they can't afford to pay their bills this winter. Workers in Scotland see their wages lower today in real terms than they were in 2010. So it's no wonder in Scotland that teachers are on strike, nurses in the RCN and ambulance workers in the GMB have rejected the Scottish Government's pay offers. It's the same across the UK, yet we now learn that instead of negotiating in good faith, this UK Government wants to strip those workers of their rights. So does the Minister think it's right to clap nurses, teachers and many more public sector workers 1 year, only to propose sacking them the next for asking for a fair pay rise?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member well knows, the reasons why there are public sector workers striking in Scotland is because of the incompetency of the SNP government in Edinburgh. This government is taking action to ensure that public services are protected through the anti-strike legislation, and that is ensuring that people who use the NHS and other essential services are protected from these types of strike action. Mr. Speaker, the government's energy price guarantee continues to support households across Great Britain, including in Scotland. The autumn statement by the Chancellor set out how the scheme will be adjusted by reducing typical household energy bills to an annual equivalent of around £3,000 from April 2023 until April 2024, saving an average £500 per household.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A constituent contacted me before Christmas as she was struggling to keep up with her home energy costs. When my office contacted her provider, we found that there was little support for her as a victim of Helms, the huge costs related mostly to the Green Deal. What discussions has the Secretary of State had with his Cabinet colleagues about tailored energy support for Scottish victims of the Green Deal scam?
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Green Deal, as the honourable member will know, was designed to make sure that people were able to make their households more energy efficient, but we've always been clear that the repayment should not have been greater than the savings being delivered. If anybody has been if the Honourable Lady's constituent has been missold, it's important that a complaint is made to the loan provider and ultimately to the Financial Ombudsman Services. If that route has been pursued and the Honourable Lady still needs some assistance, please do contact me. I'm happy to meet her to discuss it further.
Minister Liz Truss.
Speaker, one of the reasons families in Scotland are paying some of the highest electricity bills in Europe is because of 13 years of failed Tory and SNP energy policies. Scotland is a key contributor in delivering a secure, affordable, low-carbon energy system for the whole of the UK. Under Labour's proposals, we would lower bills for Scottish households and be energy independent, with a plan for clean power by 2020. Now, the former Conservative Energy Minister, Claire Perry, says Labour are serious about Britain's energy crisis, unlike my former party. Does the Minister agree with his former colleague?
Mr. Speaker, I do not agree with the Honourable Lady's analysis. This government remains committed to ensuring the UK has a green, secured energy supply, which I do agree with the Honourable Lady's assessment of the SNP's failings, and we saw that yesterday in their botched energy statement to the Scottish Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I trust the honourable gentleman recalls that this House overwhelmingly rejected the motion to which he refers to, because this government is focused on delivering for the people of Scotland. That means helping tackle on the cost of living, protecting our long-term energy security and growing our economy.
This place as Secretary of State for Scotland, while explaining the UK government's lack of appetite for a referendum on Scotland's place in the United Kingdom, repeated many times, the route to referendum in 2014 involved consensus between the governments. Given that democracy is fuelled by consensus, is the Secretary of State for Scotland working towards establishing that consensus, or is he content to deny the people of Scotland their democratic voice?
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State for Scotland and this government will continue to work with the Scottish Government to deliver on the priorities of the people of Scotland. That is dealing with the cost of living, that is dealing with the NHS, that is dealing with our education system, and a long list of other issues which the Scottish Government are completely failing to deliver on. It is certainly not another independent referendum.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We start with questions to the Prime Minister. Count Smith.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
There are no NHS dentists taking on patients in Lancaster and Fleetwood, and for those constituents of mine lucky enough to have one, they're waiting months for an appointment. So can I ask the Prime Minister how long he had to wait for his last NHS dentist appointment?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as a result of the new reformed NHS dentistry contract, there are now more NHS dentists across the UK with more funding, making sure people can get the treatment they need. But, Mr. Speaker, let me answer the lady directly. I am registered with an NHS GP. I have used independent healthcare in the past. I'll answer her question. I am registered with NHS GP. I have used independent healthcare in the past, and I'm also grateful to the Friarage Hospital for the fantastic care they've given my family over the years. But the truth is, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to come from an NHS family, and that's why I'm passionately committed to protecting it with more funding, more doctors and nurses, and a clear plan to cut the waiting list.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You are 24 times more likely to become a doctor if a parent is a doctor, 17 times more likely to become a lawyer if a parent is a lawyer, and there is a lower proportion of disadvantaged young people being admitted to degree-level apprenticeships by employers than to degrees by universities. So I warmly welcome what my right honourable friend set out last week about education and family, but does he agree with me we also need our universities, employers and professions playing their part to improve social mobility in the UK?
Well, Mr. Speaker, everyone should have the opportunity to succeed, and my honourable friend is absolutely right that we all have a part to play. That's why I'm pleased the Social Mobility Commission is working to provide new information to young people about the opportunities available to them, but also a toolkit for employers so that they can also play their part in improving social mobility.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the 13 years of the last Labour government, there were no national NHS strikes. Yeah. If the Prime Minister had negotiated with the nurses before Christmas, they wouldn't be on strike. If he'd negotiated with the ambulance workers, they wouldn't be on strike either. So why is he choosing to prolong the misery rather than end these strikes?
Yeah.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've always been clear that we want to have constructive dialogue with the unions. That is also why, when it comes to the issue of pay, we have accepted in full the independent recommendations of the pay review bodies. But now, the honourable gentleman simply doesn't have a policy when it comes to this question. If he wants, he talks about wanting to end the strikes. The question for him is simple then. Why does he not support our minimum safety legislation? We all know why. We all know why, Mr. Speaker. It's because he's on the side of his union paymasters, not patients.
Mr. Speaker, when I clapped nurses, I meant it. His response to the greatest crisis in the history of the NHS is to threaten to sack our nurses. His Transport Secretary says it's not the solution. His Education Secretary hopes it won't apply in schools. His own assessments say it could increase the number of strikes. The simple truth is you can't legislate your way out of 13 years of failure. Between 2010 and 2019, before anyone had heard of COVID, Prime Minister, the number of people stuck on the NHS waiting list doubled. Why do patients always wait longer under the Tories?
Whoa. This is the new year. I want to start off with the refreshed chamber, but certainly not by interruption. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about the minimum safety legislation. Let's just talk about it a little bit further, because this is a simple proposition that no one denies the union's freedom to strike, but it is also important to balance that with people's right to have access to life-saving healthcare at the same time. Mr. Speaker, this shouldn't be controversial. This shouldn't be controversial. The International Labour Organization supports minimum service levels. They're present in France, in Italy, in Spain. Normally, he's in favour of more European alignment, Mr. Speaker. Why not now?
Mr. Speaker, they've gone from clapping the nurses to sacking the nurses. It's that simple. And to add insult to injury, they're the cause of the crisis. His government commissioned a report on waiting times. He knows this. His own report says this is not a COVID problem, it's 10 years of managed decline. As a result, 7.2 million people are now waiting for treatment. He says he wants to be held to account over that. So let's be very clear. Is his promise merely to get those numbers back to where they were before COVID, that's 4.6 million, or back to where Labour had them in 2010, almost half of that? Which is it?
Mr. Speaker, again, let's just start with the facts. The honourable gentleman seems to completely ignore the fact that not just in England, But in Scotland and in Wales and in many other European countries, COVID has had an extraordinary impact on health services. Now we have a very clear plan to bring the waiting list down, and it's one that the NHS supports. But I tell you what the NHS doesn't need. What they don't need is Labour's idea. What they don't need is Labour's only idea, which is for another completely disruptive, top-down, unfunded reorganisation buying out every single GP contract. Now, these aren't my words, Mr. Speaker. The CEO of the Nuffield Trust said it will cost a fortune and it's out of date, just like the Labour Party.
Mr. Speaker, so he can't tell us how much he'll reduce waiting lists by or when. So much for accountability that he wants. As ever with this Prime Minister, you scratch the surface and you find there is nothing there. Last month, 1.4 million people waited more than 4 weeks for a GP appointment. When Labour left government, you were guaranteed an appointment in 2 days. When does the Prime Minister expect to get back to that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to waiting lists, we've already eliminated 2-year wait lists, done last year. We're on track this spring to eliminate those waiting 18 months, with a clear plan to go further, to eliminate those waiting 52 weeks by next spring. And we're doing that with record funding, more community diagnostic centres, more surgical hubs and more patient choice. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I've made tackling wait lists one of my 5 priorities. But what are his? They seem to change every single week. Right? That first, he was against NHS outsourcing. Now, he's apparently in favour of it. He's inconsistent, unprincipled, and in hock to his union.
I wonder if Order. Can I just remind the Prime Minister, it's Prime Minister's questions, not opposition questions. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard the Prime Minister saying he's now registered with an NHS doctor, so he'll soon enjoy the experience of waiting on hold every morning at 8 a.m. to get a GP appointment. But I can tell him that those that are waiting now don't want another round of empty promises or boasting about what he's done. They just want to know when they'll be able to see a doctor. And this is not just about routine care. There could be nothing more terrifying than being told you might have cancer. That's why the last Labour government brought in a guarantee you'd been seen by a specialist within 2 weeks. Today, 50,000 people are waiting longer than that. 50,000. And everyone in this House will appreciate the anxiety that they're feeling. So when will cancer patients once again get the certainty of quick care that they got under Labour?
Mr. Speaker, why is there a challenge with cancer times right now? I tell you, again, it's just... absolutely no understanding of the situation, Mr. Speaker. What happened to cancer referrals during COVID? They went down by almost 2/3, Mr. Speaker. That was because of a pandemic that they went down. And by the way, if we had stayed and listened to him, we'd still be in lockdown and there'd be a bit more waiting list, right, Mr. Speaker? But actually right now, there are record levels of cancer treatment as we catch up with those missed things. But he talks about what's terrifying, Mr. Speaker. What's terrifying is right now. What's terrifying is that right now, people not knowing whether when they call 999, they will get the treatment that they need. Now, Mr. Speaker, in Australia and Canada and the US, they ban strikes on blue light services. We're not doing that. All we're saying is that in these emergency services, patients should be able to rely on a basic level of life-saving care. Why is he against that, Mr. Speaker?
There's not a minimum level of service any day because they've broken the NHS. And he's not promising that people would get to see a doctor in a few days, like they did under Labour. He's not promising that cancer patients would get urgent treatment, as they did under Labour. He's not even promising an NHS that puts patients first, like it did under Labour. No, he's promising that that one day, although we can't say when, their record-high waiting list will stop growing. And that's it. After 13 years in government, what does it say? But the best they can offer is that at some point they might stop making things worse.
Right, Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the NHS, it's crystal clear. The Conservatives on the side of patients, Labour on the side of their union paymasters. But, Mr. Speaker, I've laid out my priorities for the country. Waiting lists down, inflation down, debt down, growth up, and the boat's stopped, Mr. Speaker. All he does is flip from one thing to another, and that's the difference between him and me. He's focused on petty politics. I'm delivering for Britain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my constituents in Truro and Falmouth, actually, I would like to thank all of the health and social care professions in Cornwall for all of the hard work they're doing in a particularly difficult winter. In Cornwall, we don't get any respite in the summer because everybody comes to Cornwall for their holidays, which is brilliant. So there is no respite in the summer or the winter for our health and social care professionals. And in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, when we're trying to recruit people into social care, which is a vocation, they are competing with hospitality. And I would like to ask my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, whether he is aware of these extra challenges that places like Cornwall face in recruitment and retention.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to shine a spotlight, and I share with her and be incredibly proud of all our social care workers for the commitment that they have to their profession. And that's why many of them will benefit this spring from an almost 10% increase in the national living wage, putting an extra £1,600 in their pay slips. But also, we want to make sure that they feel valued with professional development, training and career progression, and the £500 million investment we're putting into the social care workforce will do exactly that for hers and other workers.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, the longest and deepest recession in the entire G7. Brexit, 13 years of Tory rule. The energy price crisis, inflation and interest rates. If the people of Scotland are to do the math, as the Prime Minister so hopes, will they not come to the conclusion that this union simply doesn't add up?
Well, I'm pleased the honourable gentleman brought up energy, and he's right to do that, because energy, and when it comes to the economy, is incredibly important to Scotland's energy, and actually Scotland will play a fantastic part in helping us transition to net zero. But what we do now know is that the Scottish Government don't want to support Scottish energy industry and the 200,000 jobs that it produces. I'm keen to work with the Scottish Government to support the North Sea, because it's something that we're all very proud of in the United Kingdom.
But, Mr. Speaker, if he wants to talk about the fact that Scotland is energy-rich but fuel-poor on Westminster's watch, I am more than happy to do so. But for today, let's reflect upon numbers, and in particular those numbers which were shone a light on by Sam Coates of Sky, in particular those in relation to the Prime Minister's favourite potential successor, which showed that over the course of 4 months, from 4 speeches, he raked in excess of £1 million. Does the Prime Minister not find it utterly perverse that senior members of the Conservative Party are feathering their nest in this way, whilst at the same time seeking to deny working people the opportunity to strike for fair pay?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think we need to talk about our predecessors, but I remember. I think it was one of his predecessors that did indeed work for Russia Today, if I'm not mistaken. But what I would say is he talks about the priorities. You know, yesterday the SNP spent time talking yet more about independence at a time when we should be talking about delivering for people across the United Kingdom, focusing on their jobs, improving the NHS across the UK, in Scotland as in everywhere else. That's the kind of thing I want to talk to the Scottish Government about, and I hope that he'll work with me to do that.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Conservative governments have a proud record of supporting the UK steel industry. So can I thank my right honourable friend,
commend the Prime Minister for the work that he has already done for steel. He will know that steel is a vital strategic industry.
Absolutely.
It is essential for everything we do, from defence to growth. So can I ask him, will he do everything he can to ensure that we are always able to make steel in this country? And does he agree with me that steel is always safest under a Conservative...
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for the steel industry, and this government remains committed to a thriving UK steel industry. That's why our support for steel includes almost £800 million in relief for electricity costs, and steel companies are eligible to bid for up to £1.5 billion in capital grants to speed their transition to net zero steel production.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in wishing all the best to Gareth Bale, the former captain of the Wales men's soccer team, who's been a national inspiration and took Wales to the Football World Cup. This Tory government attacks dedicated health and ambulance staff, but disruption from strikes is as nothing compared with the chronic disruption caused every day by their 13 years butchering of health budgets. Meanwhile, Labour's Health Secretary in Wales follows the Tory playbook, blaming patients themselves for the standards of their health. But the reality is this: health services in Wales suffer from a combination of mismanagement by Labour and a Westminster funding system which perpetuates poverty.
Yeah, indeed.
Levelling.
Prime Minister. Far too long. The Prime Minister must have got
Will he therefore commit to funding Wales in public?
Prime Minister, you can't go on forever, Liz.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, let me join with the Honourable Lady as a Southampton fan. Gareth Bale, also a hero of mine as well, and I wish him well. But when it comes to funding Wales, it's as a result of the funding from Barnet that the Welsh Government receives around significantly more funding than the NHS in England, but also £1.2 billion of extra funding as a result of the autumn statement. And I'd say what I said to the Leader of the Opposition, this isn't about actually political point scoring. The NHS is under pressure in Wales, as it is in Scotland and in England, in large part because of the impact of a global pandemic, and she would do well to recognise that.
David Goodwin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, unlike parties opposite, including the Scottish National Party and even the member for Aberdeen South, I know my right honourable friend supports or recognises the critical role that oil and gas companies and their employees critically have in not only providing energy security but also the delivery of the energy transition to net zero. Can he therefore confirm that this government's ongoing commitment to expanding on our carbon capture, utilisation and storage capacity, including the Acorn project in St Fergus in my constituency, and can he provide an update on the Track 2 sequencing?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion and campaigner for this project. We will invest up to £1 billion to establish carbon capture and storage in 4 industrial clusters by 2030. We very much recognise the benefits of the Scottish cluster and the role it could play in decarbonisation, and we're progressing our Track 2 and we'll set out further details in due course.
Davis Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the Times recently reported that schools across the UK are in crisis as the effects of online influencer Andrew Tate's vile misogyny infiltrates our classrooms and society. Teachers are now having to develop their own resources to re-educate boys who are being brainwashed online by his deeply toxic messaging. The Prime Minister has been too slow to recognise this damage this is causing. What has he done? What is his government doing to tackle this misogyny, this incel culture and the radicalisation of young men in this country? And will he commit to giving teachers the resources that they need to address this problem head-on?
Mr. Speaker, with regard to funding, we announced in the autumn statement £2 billion of extra funding for our schools. But I'm also proud that this government has introduced the world-leading, world-first online safety bill, which specifically improves protections for children and puts very strict obligations and penalties on tech companies for enforcing them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Building a Brighter Future project at Torbay Hospital will be the biggest single investment in South Devon's healthcare services since the NHS was founded in 1948. Can he assure me the government's commitment to it remains unchanged?
My honourable friend is a fantastic champion for his local hospital and his constituents. I'm pleased to say that the new hospital scheme for Torbay is part of our plan to deliver dozens more hospitals by 2030. We remain committed to the delivery of that new hospital, and I'm pleased that his trust are talking to the new hospital programme team about how to progress those plans.
Alex Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Taxpayers are set to lose tens of millions of pounds after the transfer of valuable public assets to two Teesside businessmen, all without a full and transparent procurement process. And a relative of one of those people is now benefiting from millions of pounds worth of scrap from the same Teesworks site. Will the Prime Minister launch an inquiry into these crony contracts? And whilst he's at it, tell his Environment Secretary to get serious about the environmental disaster of the Teesside Coast, which is linked to the site.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman will already be aware, DEFRA already carried out a comprehensive, evidence-led investigation, considered everything robustly, and concluded that natural causes was most likely responsible for some of the things that we saw. But we recognise people want a thorough investigation of this issue, and DEFRA have confirmed that an independent panel will be set up to report quickly.
Philip Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour-controlled Bradford Council continually neglect the needs of Bingley and other parts of my constituency as they pour all of their money into their inner-city heartlands. Therefore, my constituents look to the government in order to put right their failings. That's why the Levelling Up Fund is so important. So, will the Prime Minister insist that the Levelling Up Fund for Bingley, which has been submitted, which will also unlock many millions of pounds of private sector investment, will he insist that that bid is successful when the announcement's made in the near future?
What about mine? Well, Mr. Speaker, unlike the Labour Council, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for his constituents in Bingley. As I have told him previously, I can't comment on individual bids, but I wish him every success and will be following with close interest how it proceeds.
Caroline Harris. Caroline Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister believe that over 40,000 interactions by either social media, email or letter regarding the poor customer service and working conditions at the delivery company Every warrants an investigation by the relevant government department? His ministers in Bays think not. But I'm sure the Prime Minister would want the general public to believe that he at least is interested enough in this problem to take action.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am aware that other government ministers have looked into this issue and are currently considering the matter at hand, and I'd be happy to write to her when we learn more about the situation.
The Bruce.
Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree that the right way to secure the best future for the British people is to deliver on the people's priorities and secure a strong economy?
Yeah.
And will he confirm that he will not make any unfunded spending commitments which would rack up billions of debt, as the party opposite have done in the last week?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. If we want to safeguard the future of our public services and make sure that our young people inherit a strong economy, we must be disciplined on spending and borrowing. She's absolutely right about no unfunded spending commitments. Unlike, as she says, the party opposite, at last count, £90 billion of unfunded spending commitments. It's the same old Labour, Mr. Speaker. They always run out of other people's money.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Less than half of Wakefield's children managed to see an NHS dentist last year. My constituent, Mr. Fakazai's 6-year-old daughter, has never seen an NHS dentist. She has 10 teeth, which are black with decay, and is often crying with pain. Her father feels helpless. He's called every dentist in Wakefield for a place, but hasn't managed to secure one. Over 25% of 5-year-olds in Wakefield already have visible tooth decay. So when will the Prime Minister stop dithering and take action to address our national dental emergency?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about the case raised by the honourable gentleman. I'm happy to look into that specific one more closely. But as I said in answer to an earlier question, we have recently reformed the NHS dentistry contract, hundreds of millions of pounds of more funding and more dentists, which should make a difference around the country. But I'll write to him on the specific case.
Liz Ross.
Scotland's oil and gas industry supports 90,000 Scottish jobs, but yesterday Nicola Sturgeon's SNP government published plans calling for as fast as possible shutdown of the industry and an end to new exploration. These plans are naive and reckless and were previously described by the SNP leader in this House as crazy. So will the Prime Minister reaffirm his support for Scotland's oil and gas workers and the future of our industry?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, honourable friend is absolutely right. We know that we will have to rely on hydrocarbons for decades to come as we transition to net zero, and consuming oil and gas from the North Sea means less than half the carbon footprint of importing that same oil and gas, which obviously makes sense to do it here and in the process support tens of thousands of jobs in Scotland. So I can reassure him that the Scottish oil and gas industry has this government's wholehearted support.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Tory crisis in the NHS includes ophthalmology, the largest and busiest outpatient service. There are more than 650,000 people waiting to see an eye care specialist. Will the Prime Minister back my bill calling for a national eye health strategy that would ensure that nobody waiting to see a specialist will go without and potentially lead to a complete loss of sight?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable lady for her campaigning in this area, and we are taking action to improve things. Over the past 5 years, the National Institute for Health and Care Research has invested more than £100 million to support research into eye conditions. But I know that there's more we can do, and my honourable friend, the Minister, I believe, is sitting down to talk to the honourable lady in due course, and I look forward to hearing about those comments.
Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, today I and others met with Sebastian Lai, the son of Jimmy Lai, who languishes in prison, the ex-owner of Apple Daily. I remind my right honourable friend that he is a British citizen and a British passport holder, and he now faces a trial at the end of the year in which he can be incarcerated under the new national security laws for life. For what? For publishing truth to power. Will my right honourable friend please now direct the rest of his government, particularly the Foreign Office, now to warn the Chinese government, if they persist with this, he, and alongside the Americans who have already done this, will threaten that the use of common law in Hong Kong will be taken away.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend speaks with authority on these issues, and I thank him for his continued engagement on this critical issue. He knows the actions we have already taken with regard to Hong Kong, not least providing refuge for hundreds of thousands of people here, and being robust in standing up to what we believe to be Chinese aggression and indeed an undermining of the settlement that we fought so hard to achieve. He has my absolute assurance I will continue to remain engaged and robust on this, and I look forward to sitting down with him to discuss this particular issue in more detail as soon as possible.
We're Hobbs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Half of British women and a fifth of men have been sexually harassed at work or a place of study. The government's own figures show that 41 of those said their perpetrators faced no consequences. Thanks to cross-party and government support, my private member's bill, which has now passed committee stage, will bring about a culture change to protect workers from harassment and sexual harassment, both from fellow employees and third-party individuals. Will the Prime Minister join me in celebrating the cross-party work on this important change in the law, and by personally supporting its aims and objectives and ensuring its safe continued passage through this Parliament?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable lady for her important work on this issue? And sexual harassment has absolutely no place in the workplace, and everyone should be able to feel safe at work. Now, of course, we need to make sure that legislation doesn't have unintended consequences, but I know she is meeting with my right honourable friend, the Minister for Women and Equalities, to discuss her bill further, and I look forward to hearing her progress on that meeting.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the disgusting anti-Semitic, anti-vax conspiracy theories that have been promulgated online this morning are not only deeply offensive, but anti-scientific and have no place in this House or in our wider society.
Prime Minister.
Well, can I join with my right honourable friend in completely condemning those types of comments that we saw this morning in the strongest possible terms? Obviously, it is utterly unacceptable to make linkages and use language like that, and I'm determined that the scourge of anti-Semitism is eradicated. It has absolutely no place in our society, and I know that the previous few years have been challenging for the Jewish community, and I never want them to experience anything like that ever again.
Final question, Nadia Whitten.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a 95-year-old constituent of mine spent 41 hours in A&E. When will the Prime Minister admit that the NHS is collapsing because of 13 years of underfunding and do something about it instead of blaming the nurses striking to save it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear about the experience of the elderly constituent that the Honourable Lady raised, and my sympathies go out to her. But this is not about blaming anybody. This is about recognising that the NHS, whether in Scotland, whether in Wales, where it is run by the Labour Party, whether here in England, is facing pressure as we recover from a pandemic. The right thing to do is to have a clear plan in place to work with doctors and nurses to ease that pressure. That's what we're focused on doing, and that's what our plans will deliver.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions. We'll just let the chamber clear. Right, let us come to the 10-minute rule bill. George Eustace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to reduce the duty charged on renewable liquid heating fuel to provide for the